This week on London Real, we have Dennis McKenna, psychedelic researcher and brother of the legendary Terence McKenna.
They broke the mold when they made him.
Culture is not your friend.
Oh, the book was a very cathartic experience. It was not easy to write.
Where did human consciousness come from?
He has never really gone away. He's present on the YouTube. His talks are all over the place. And so he's become this kind of strange ghost. We discovered DMT in Berkeley, and not only was it the most amazing drug we'd encountered, it was the most amazing thing we'd encountered. This cannot be ignored. Ayahuasca's coming onto the world stage and saying, wake up, you monkeys.
London Real presents Dennis McKenna, The Screaming Abyss.
The world is not only queerer than you imagine, it's queerer than you can imagine.
If you've ever perturbed your consciousness in any way, and yes, you know what I'm talking about, then you will have heard the name McKenna. Probably Terence, perhaps Dennis, but these two brothers wrote the book on how to perturb consciousness through the use of mushrooms. And this is one of our plant allies. Others are ayahuasca and some of the substances derived from them, like dimethyltryptamine, DMT. And anyone who's listened to Terence McKenna speak, he's now dead, knows that this bard had a way of talking about culture, consciousness, information, language in a way that no man had since, and no man, in my opinion, ever will in the entire existence of humanity. And Terence didn't do it to sell something. He did it just to tell you how he was thinking. And I've had many amazing evenings listening to Terence McKenna. If you ever want to download his old audio lectures, the Psychedelic Salon is an amazing resource to do that. But him and Dennis were part of the Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, which was a group of students from Berkeley who went down to Colombia in search of DMT a long time ago, and they came back with mushrooms, and they ended up writing a book about how to grow them, and are probably responsible for the widespread use of them, and probably responsible for you using them if you ever have in your life, because without these brothers really rediscovering them down in the Amazon, we might not have had access to them. So there's that, and then there's all the things that came since. Terence was a visionary. Dennis was a researcher. They both had kind of a dichotomy as far as roles, but they also were brothers, and brothers hate each other. They love each other. They fight. They make up. And these two were very close. And I went really deep with Dennis, and we spoke so intimately about his relationship with Terence, Terence's time wave theory, what he disagreed about it, Terence's brain tumor and how he died, how Terence actually stopped taking psychedelics before he died, and so many of the other issues and things they talked to each other about. And it was very special for me to sit down and have this time and pay homage to two brothers that have influenced me so much. When I go and have my time with Mother Ayahuasca, one of our plant allies in plant medicines, I always listen to Terence McKenna audio lectures in the wee hours of the morning, and they're just so profound, and they tell me so much about the experience I've just had that this was an episode I couldn't afford not to present to you and to the world. It was just an essential. So myself and the whole team at London Real, so proud to present to you Dennis McKenna and his story of growing up and working with and having the adventures with Terence McKenna. And so sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you don't know much about these two, then please do your research and find out. And if you do, then you'll be smiling the whole way. So now I leave you with Mr. Dennis McKenna.
The entrepreneurial journey, it can be a lonely road. I push myself in so many areas, but you can't do it all yourself.
thing about the academy is it's like, look, you have the ideas, you have the ability, you have the skill, and you have the sort of ambition for yourself. But when you have a group of people pulling you forward, it's so important.
Accountability is what's missing from most of the programs or any gurus or any internet mentor that I had before.
I wanted to get some accountability. I wanted to make myself accountable to a group, to you.
The reason we started the Academy is because I felt like we were doing these amazing talks, like we'd have a Peter Sage episode or a Dan Pena episode or a Kala or someone, and you get super inspired, and then YouTube stops, and then you go back to your life and you don't make any changes. And it was just like, what? It felt like, what are we doing? If you're designing your life right, the good times are now. And in a few years, you'll look back and say, wow, that was amazing.
The thing about the Academy is it has so many different sort of layers to it. I think your web seminars are awesome. The way you broke it down and the style of your teaching is pretty awesome.
I like the feed. When I have to motivate myself, I kind of look at others struggling and getting over those struggles. So I actually follow daily the feed.
Best feature would be the sort of Facebook aspect of it, the social media aspect of it, as in creating a profile with your goals, your dreams.
Everyone's on the same vibe, and we may be at different stages in our journeys, but everyone's on the same page at the end of the day. Everyone's really trying to push themselves and building the best you. It really resonates with me.
And the fact that I'm committing a small amount of money and the fact that I'm actually trying to interact with those people means that I'm invested and means that I will keep it for the long run.
You have to be serious about yourself and what you want to achieve. And if you're serious about yourself, this is going to be such a fantastic platform.
London Real, sponsored by Bulletproof. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dennis McKenna, who has studied psychedelics for over 40 years with his research focused on the interdisciplinary study of Amazonian ethnopharmacology and plant hallucinogens. You are the brother of well-known psychedelics proponent Terence McKenna and are a founding board member and the director of ethnopharmacology at the Hefner Research Institute. Your book, The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, chronicles your lifelong relationship with your older brother Terence. Dennis, it's a real honor. Welcome to London Real.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, the picture of the two of you on your book, of these two boys with these 50s haircuts, it just, I had to ask you about that. You know, you can see a picture of it there, and I'm
Yes.
sure you chose that one. You know, it makes me just want to ask, and first I want to say how you started the book with a passage. You said, reality is a hallucination concocted by our brains. Memory is a fragmented tapestry patched with confabulation. I was wondering, did you ever imagine that these two brothers with the 50s haircuts from an Irish family in Colorado were about to go on this incredible adventure?
No, never imagined it. Never imagined it. I mean, that passage, that thing I put in the book, is almost a disclaimer. You know, it's a way of wiggling out of what are undoubtedly there are inaccuracies in the book, because much of it depends on recollection. And as I was writing the book, I was appalled at some points in at the gaps in memory. But you remember what's important, what you feel is important. Whether you remember it accurately is another matter. But to the degree I could, I made it accurate. But that was my excuse to say, well, not everything in here is going to be absolutely correct. But to the extent that I could, I made it accurate. And I'm Irish, right? And so, as my brother was, and you are as well. So, so we Irishmen understand. Don't let facts stand in the way of a good story, right?
The gift of the gab.
Yeah. But to a certain degree, I tried to make my book accurate within my recollection. I found that I was regretting not keeping better notes at certain junctures of life, but at other junctures, I did keep good notes, and so that helped. But yeah, so...
Was this a book you always knew you were going to write at some point? Or was this something that you just kind of woke up one day and just decided it was about time to do it?
More like that. I didn't really think I was going to write this personal memoir, but it seemed that, after Terence died, it was very difficult for me when he died. I grieved very much and still do for him. We were so close, and it seemed like such a loss, and it was almost as though a deep part of me was just ripped out of me. So I was wounded, and it took me, that long to come to the conclusion that, well, as Terence was famous for being a good storyteller, I feel like I had a side to the story. I had an aspect of our shared experiences that I wanted to share with the world. And so it was a confluence of this desire to do that and the opportunity, but it was 10 years after Terence died that I really came to that conclusion. And at the time I thought, well, I have to get an agent and I have to find somebody that's interested in this story and so on. And I don't really know if I can do that, but I talked to Dan Levy, who was Terence's agent at the time, and I knew Dan pretty well, and I asked him, and he said, well, there's this new thing going, and this was 2011, and maybe 2010, I guess it was, end of 2010, this new thing called Kickstarter is going, and people are funding their own projects through this Kickstarter, and I said, well, gee, that sounds good. I'll look into that. And I did. And I decided to go for it, and do a Kickstarter campaign, because I figured that if anybody had an existing fan base that might support this kind of thing, certainly it would be Terence. And there's a community out there that really loves Terence, as I discovered. So I decided to put a Kickstarter campaign out there, and as it turned out, it was a right judgment, because I raised more money for a book than had ever been raised on Kickstarter before. So I raised $90,000, which, nobody was more amazed than I was. That gave me the resources to take time off and write the book, pay for its publishing, pay for some degree its advertisement. So I did it, and it was a good idea. It's turned out to be a mixed bag in some ways, because when you publish your own book, you don't have a publishing company behind you. You don't even have, I am the promoter, I'm the warehouse foreman, I do the shipping, I do it all, although I have a lot of it on Amazon. But all in all, I do not regret writing the book at all. It's opened a lot of doors for me, and I've been many interesting places as a result of having written it, I think, and it's been also personally very good. It's been a chance for me to really, in some ways, integrate and some of that grieving and some of what I had been feeling. The book was a very cathartic experience for me. It was not easy to write some passages of it. I have no regrets. I'm glad I wrote it.
I read a blog that you wrote when you were at your kitchen table when you got your funding, and you were like, "Uh-oh, now I have to write this thing."
Yeah, right.
And
that was the first reaction. Oh man, what have I done? Now I'm in deep trouble. I have to do it. But I got over that and managed to, over the 18 months or so it took to write it, I managed to get a good workflow going and finally settled down into it and, and wrote it. And it's been well received, in most quarters. And of course, after you finish and after it's actually in print, then I think every author thinks of different passages, different ways it could have been better, and only the author knows all the flaws in the book, of which there are many, but why, and not inaccuracies as such, just things I either left out that I meant to put in, or, but that's okay. I mean, may not be the only book I ever write. Hopefully it won't, right. But
it's beautifully written.
It is what it is.
It's beautiful to read, and it's very personal.
It is very personal.
I was curious, when you first started writing, were you thinking, okay, I'm just going to start out with the facts and then tell a few stories, or did you know right away that you needed to go in and get vulnerable about a lot of your emotions over the years?
I didn't want to just write a dry narrative. I knew that this was going to be a personal story, and that was part of the reason to write it, was, as I say, for my own kind of healing and emotional, integration of all these things. So I wanted it to be a personal story, and I sort of based on the feedback from the Kickstarter audience. Of course, many other people besides them have now bought it, but based on that, I felt that I'm not writing to a hostile audience. I'm writing to an audience that really cares about the Terry and Denny story, if you will, and understands, and they're not looking for, to pick it apart. And people haven't, and there's plenty of opportunity to. Most of the response that I'm aware of has been really supportive, and as you say, congratulations and good for you for writing an honest tale. So I did. So I feel like it accomplished what I wanted it to. And
I was wondering, were you close with Terence when he died in 2000, or had you kind of? I know you kind of gone your separate ways, kind of when you came back from Chorrera, and one kind of the Bard way, one the research way, and I want to hear more about that. But in 2000, were you close at that time?
Oh yes, we were close when he died. I mean, when he died, or when he got sick, we were never that far apart. We went our separate ways, but it wasn't really separate. We had lots of interaction, and we remained close for most of our life. But we'd gone through a period where we were somewhat at loggerheads about certain issues, and I think the last decade of Terence's life was very difficult for him. I think he was conflicted in lots of ways about many things. His divorce and his career and, his investment in the time wave theory, which he was beginning to seriously doubt. And, he was suffering in some ways. And looking back on it, I'm actually kind of ashamed that I wasn't more supportive of him in some ways. I was maybe, honestly, I was maybe part of what was bugging him at the time, and I should have been more supportive during that period. But we were friendly, and I think he always knew. I mean, we were sort of getting through this, right? And I think he always knew that I loved him. I don't think there was ever any question about that. And even though we may have drifted apart and we had our little tiffs, you know, and that sort of thing, you know, but when he got sick, I just basically dropped everything and I was there for him, you know. And the day I heard he was sick, that he had this episode where he had these seizures on the Big Island, been airlifted to Honolulu and all that, that came to me like 24 hours after the event, and it came in the form of voicemail left on my office phone by Dan Levy, by this editor who was very close to him. He, you know, left this message and says, something's going on out there. I'm headed out to Hawaii, you know. And so when I got the message, immediately I called Dan and said, okay, I'm on the plane. I'm there. So I went out immediately. And, you know, Terence was by then in the hospital in Honolulu, and pretty much I just put my whole life on hold for the next year, and it was just, okay, I am there for you. Whatever needs to happen, I'm here for you. It was easy. It was difficult to do that, but career-wise, it was okay. It was easy to do that because I didn't have anything like a real job at the time. You know, I was a consultant working for different companies in the natural products world. That's what I'd done for the last few years. So I controlled my own schedule, you know, and I was just able to put all that aside. And that, so then my you know, my preoccupation for the next year was to, you know, whatever difference Terence's I had at that time, just put all that aside, you know. And it was just, I'm there for my brother. And
what was it like that last year? Was he optimistic?
No, it was hard.
It was diagnosis pretty much. Yeah.
This diagnosis is a death sentence for most people. It's 98% mortality. It's the most virulent kind of brain cancer that there is. And when he got the diagnosis in Honolulu, you know, excellent neuro-oncologist and all that, but he knows, you know, I was there by then at the hospital, as well as Terence's son and Dan and other people, other significant people. You know, but when the neuro-oncologist came to the hospital to discuss the diagnosis, he was very blunt. He just said, you know, my advice, we'll do everything we can, but, you know, my advice to you is, you know, put your affairs in order, which is a pretty telling thing. You don't want to hear that, you know, but he was honest, and he said, you know, and you know, he said, and he had operated on many people, worked with many people with this disease. The doctor had never had been able to save a single patient. And I told him, you know, you must be one of the most depressed physicians possible. Why do you keep doing this? He said, well, maybe one day, you know. And he was very, very good, very open to alternative therapies and all that. So we went into it with our eyes open, pretty much. That we knew, or we, Terence and his loved ones, knew that the time was short. That being said, we decided to do, you know, as they say, everything we can. And my job, in a way, in that time became, at least as I saw it, and I think as Terence saw it, is to be the kind of the expert, because I'm the only one with any background in medicine and pharmacology and all that. So So we went ahead with the treatments that the doctor recommended. They said it was not operable, that they couldn't get this tumor out without really damaging his brain. So the first thing they recommended was this thing called the gamma knife, which is basically you fire a high energy beam of gamma rays into the tumor and try to stun it and slow it down and maybe kill it even, or kill big parts of it. And that's good. That's the first thing you do. It's non-invasive, but it's a pretty radical treatment. So they did that, and then they followed up with radiation treatments with standard, and they did that, and it slowed it down for a while. But then, as time went on, it began to come back again, and that's pretty much what they said it would do. They checked him out, and they said, not only is it not working, it appears to be spreading now into his spinal cord and all that, which was a very unexpected result, because these central nervous system tumors, they rarely spread. This one was actually spreading. So at that point, it was like, that was the point at which the doctor said, there's nothing we can do.
Okay.
Threw up their hands and said, there's nothing we can do. And that was like mid-January, and he was in San Francisco, and he had some very close friends. This is where your real friends really come to the, step up to the plate, who said they would basically make their home in San Rafael available to him as a hospice site, and he went, and there he was until he died. And we tried all sorts of alternative therapy at that point. I mean, and had been all through, without really putting much faith that it would work. We tried a lot of different things, but the upshot was that none of it worked. He was really in a state of rapid decline, and he died on the 3rd of April. So he died about a month shy of a year of his diagnosis. So the gene therapy did really nothing to prolong his life.
What was the reaction to the community when he died?
To the community? Well, of course, the people were devastated. I mean, there was an outpouring of sympathy for everybody, for the family and everything. There was a group at the time called the Novelty Group, which was about, it was a discussion group about the time wave and all that. Beautiful people. They got together a CD called Journey Through the Spheres that was just put together and donated to the family, sold just to provide some money for the family and so on. It was, I don't think it ever sold a lot, but the gesture was nice, and just, what do you do in this situation? Yeah. It's just horrible. It's just, there's nothing good to be said about it. But I certainly, throughout all this whole process, I really was very moved by how many folk, people feel a personal involvement, I think, in our story and our adventure and so on. So when the chips are down, these people were there, and I really appreciate that, and I still do. And and that continues in some ways. That's why 10 years later, I can put up a Kickstarter, and that fan base is still out there.
Is Terence more famous now than he was in 2000?
He may be. It's interesting what's happened to him, which is that he has never really gone away. He's present on the YouTube and the internet, mostly YouTube. His talks are all over the place. Yeah. And so he's become this kind of strange ghost, that haunts the internet. And his thoughts and ideas are out there. And interestingly, they're as timely as they as ever, as they were in the early 90s and mid 90s when he was articulating all this stuff. I have so many students. I teach at the University of Minnesota, so I interact with a lot of young people, 20-somethings. And they so often tell me, your brother was such an influence in my life. Everything I've learned from him. And it just surprises me because these people were in diapers when Terence was at the height of his career. They weren't even born yet. Yet somehow they discover him and they listen, and it really resonates with him, which is just a testimony to how timely and timeless his ideas were. The man was ahead of his time, no doubt about it.
I've listened to probably 100 of his lectures. I listen to him on iTunes on the Psychedelic Salon.
There you go.
And sometimes I have to remind myself that he's saying this stuff in 1992 and 91 and 93, pre-internet and so many things that have changed.
All those things, right,
and
right.
Yet so much of it is so relevant and so true.
It's a phenomenon for sure. And I think, I think Terence would be amused. I think he would be happy about that, because at a certain stage in what he was talking about how the internet was going to transform everything, and it is, as we've seen, it has. So yeah, I'm happy that his ideas are so alive still, and stimulating thought and all that. So, and in the 15 years since he's died, we've seen this whole psychedelic thing just explode, and the awareness of ayahuasca, the awareness that these stigmatized, condemned, prohibited, marginalized substances are suddenly almost respectable again, as the research accumulates and we begin to see, well, actually these do have great value in medicine and so on, potentially. So we're seeing that happen. Terence has got to have a lot of credit for that.
Both of you.
Well, both of us, yes. Okay, I'll take some credit.
Are you surprised when you look at it from 2000 to 2015, where we are today, when it comes to the awareness of plant medicines? Are you surprised how quickly that happened?
I am very surprised how quickly that happened. To Terence's credit, the neat thing, the good thing about Terence is that back in the day, in the 80s and the 90s, when it was not cool to talk about this stuff in public, he was talking about it.
Right.
He never stopped talking about it. And so it kept it on the table for conversation. So that then, and I was in it too, I was working in it, but I didn't want a lot of attention. I just wanted to do my science, and I was in the background of all this. And, but during the 90s, we started this Hefter Research Institute, which is, now thriving. I mean, at the time, people said, you're nuts. Even though we had very qualified people starting it, but people said, nobody's going to support this, you're crazy. Well, now Hefter's alive and well and thriving, and most of the leading scientists in research are either on the board or being supported by us or closely affiliated with us. I don't want to take away from MAPS. MAPS doing good work too, but we're sort of the nerdy ones in the background. We're smaller, we're less well funded, but we are now getting significant funding. And because as you ramp up these clinical trials, you need more and more funding. We just got a pledge for $750,000, from a donor that I can't mention, but that's encouraging. And just the way it's fallen out, not really deliberately, but the way it's sort of gone is that MAPS has kind of staked out MDMA for their they've hooked their wagon to MDMA, and they're focusing very much on treating PTSD using that compound, which is great.
MDMA through kind of a nice way in through firefighters and soldiers, which is a great way to sell it to the public.
And there's great need for this, so that's wonderful. And they want to make a prescription drug out of MDMA, and I do believe they'll probably succeed. And just we've sort of hung our hopes on psilocybin. Because that's the other one you could study in a clinical situation. It's very compatible with human metabolism. It's not toxic. You can use it in hospice situations, for example, and give it to people who are fairly ill, and it just is the perfect clinical psychedelic. And of course, it's not the same as MDMA. But so we're sort of working on psilocybin, and not that we're limited to that, but that's just the way it's worked out. And then ayahuasca sort of remains in the wings in some ways, because being a plant, it's more difficult to study under an FDA-approved protocol. And getting approval for psychedelic research is bad enough, but then one of them happens to be a plant.
You've got another fungus, so it makes it more.
Got another, well, the psilocybin is synthetic. We work with the synthetic. It's a natural product, but it's synthetic. But ayahuasca is harder to. If you're going to study ayahuasca, you pretty much have to study the botanical preparation, because there are properties it has that any synthetic analog is not going to have, because it's 2 compounds at least and a whole bunch of other things. So ayahuasca is more difficult, but at Hefter, I become a big sort of advocate of, yes, we need to be looking into ayahuasca, and why do we have to play this silly FDA game? Let's just go to Peru and do this work. You can do good science in Peru, and ayahuasca is accepted. It's a national patrimony there. It's literally been declared to be a national patrimony. So let's do some of that work down there.
Right. And I want to talk about Peru, because you went down there for the first time in 1970, with Terence, is that right?
Well, we went to Colombia.
To Colombia, of course,
1971, right.
Okay. But before we get to that, I just wanted to say, you talk about like the 80s and 90s, how it was really rare for people to talk openly about these psychedelic experiences. And some of those recorded conversations where Terence is, people aren't using their real names. They don't want to be recorded, because for them it's dangerous, or they feel the danger to talk about then. And I guess this was kind of the Reagan say no to drugs time,
Right.
Our experiences on London Real were in 2012, we had a before and after ayahuasca episode, and I was hesitant because I thought I could never go back to banking. Now, this is 20, 25 years later, and I did a before and after DMT episode, and I'll be honest, Dennis, I was worried about my daughter and the parents and the principals and what they would think, and if a social worker would come, and we went ahead and did it anyways, and it was okay in the end, both of those times. But I can't imagine what it was like to talk about that stuff in the 80s and the 90s.
Well, yeah, it was, I mean, he was doing a lot of the talking. I wasn't doing much talking, and we were, but but I don't know. He was doing it because he was passionate about it and could not talk about it. That's what he had to talk about. That was his obsession. So he talked about it. And it turned out he was speaking to a certain audience where they felt like they couldn't, but they say, boy, I'm glad somebody's talking about this. Somebody's keeping it, the conversation open. And he did. And then we see, I don't know what's going on, Brian. There's something going on in terms of, a social and maybe even an evolutionary transformation around these plants, because the way that ayahuasca has literally exploded onto the world scene in about 10 years or so, is just mind-boggling to me. I mean, 10 years, 15 years ago, you walk up to the average person on the street and say ayahuasca, they won't know what you're talking about. Or if they do, they probably think you're some nutcase and they'll be edging away from you. Now you talk to people about ayahuasca and chances are they know what it is and they associate it with a positive, has a positive association for them. And, I don't know. I mean, I verge on sounding like a bit of a fanatic. I guess I am, but I think that ayahuasca, like many of these psychedelics, indigenous people regard them as teachers. It's all about the plant teachers. And I think that ayahuasca has been marginalized in the rainforest for years, and the indigenous people sort of have been the stewards of that. But now it's getting a little concerned as we basically, our efforts to wreck the planet accelerate. Ayahuasca is coming onto the world stage and saying, wake up, you monkeys. The first thing you have to do is wake up and realize what's going on, and then change your behavior, your approach to it. And I think the main lesson of ayahuasca, and I would say for myself even more than Terence, ayahuasca has become my own personal teacher as well as my professional preoccupation. But ayahuasca is many people are getting the message that ayahuasca is giving us a message about our I guess I can't say that.
Yes, you can.
On a podcast, our screwed up relationship with nature, and what we have to understand is, number one, that we're not separate from nature, which has been a misperception that's plagued Western society since at least the inception of Judeo-Christianity. And in fact, I think Judeo-Christianity is largely to blame for that. We have to understand that we're not part of nature, nor are we running nature. We're not in charge of this. The plants, if anything, are running nature, and they do, if you look at the dynamics of the biosphere. And I think, I think ayahuasca is trying to send us the message that we need to wake up. Many people are coming away from their sessions, especially if they go to South America, with this renewed commitment to, environmental issues. And the interesting thing is, you speak about, you were concerned about taking ayahuasca, with banker, because you were a banker and so on. Well, now chances are the guy sitting across from you is a banker in the ayahuasca session, or a CEO, or whatever. So I think that's very interesting, and that's important, because people can go to Peru and drink ayahuasca. All kinds of people can do that. But what needs to happen is that influential people can have these experiences, because they're the ones that can implement real change. If they have these experiences and come back, they can make a difference. Not that all of the rest of us can make a difference, but you know what I mean. People in influential positions of power can really change things.
And that wasn't happening in
that's important.
And in the 70s, when you and Terence had this amazing discovery of the cubensis, and you came back, in the 70s, psychedelics were associated with the non-CEO types, right? It was this counterculture, it was dangerous, it was the anti-government movement, and LSD is still tainted by a lot of those society.
Yeah, it was definitely not mainstream at that time, and it's interesting that we went to La Chorrera. really with no idea what we were doing.
What were two boys doing in 1970 going down to Colombia? This wasn't exactly a tourism destination.
It was not a tourism destination. We did not know what the fuck we were doing. we were, all we knew was
you were 20,
that
right?
I was 20, Terence was 24. All we knew was that we discovered DMT in Berkeley, in the Haight, in the Bay Area at that time. There was very little of DMT around.
Okay.
But Terence had somehow manifested it out of the matrix.
So just a few of you were smoking
Just
DMT.
a few of us were smoking it.
Okay.
And we were all, at least our group, was convinced that not only was it the most amazing drug we'd encountered, it was the most amazing thing we'd encountered in our entire lives. And we thought, you can't ignore this. This is like, the discovery of atomic energy or something. This cannot be ignored.
To watch the rest of this fascinating interview, click on the link below and go to londonrealacademy.com. There you can sign in with your social media, log in and watch the rest of the episode for free, along with all of our episodes on London Real, my webinars, and all of our premium content, all located over at londonrealacademy.com. So click on the link below, you'll be directed there and you can watch the rest of this fascinating interview, and I'll see you there.
In action, when you smoke it, you can't bring much back. There's sense of astonishment. Oh my God, what was that? And so we thought, LSD around Berkeley? Oh, LSD was